Okay. So good morning. It's interesting for me to be here with you and to share this with you, and particularly with my colleagues here, because we've been engaged in this for a while. I'm going to describe briefly two related projects, one with Elsevier, which was a precursor to the one we're currently involved in with Chorus, both of which are just demonstrating collaboration between academic libraries and publishers. But before beginning these projects, I had discussions over several years with my provost, my vice president of research, and our faculty research council about the need to document and provide improved access to faculty research without placing additional burdens on our already very busy faculty. And you've heard that theme throughout this of how much burden there is on faculty. With the development of the White House Office of Science and Technology policy mandates for deposit of federally funded research, a new word came into that discussion, and that word was compliance. And all of these discussions always ended with this plea: why can't the library solve this problem without placing additional burdens on our already very busy faculty? UF authors publish about 8,000 scholarly journal articles a year, and unfortunately, our faculty do not have a culture of deposit of their article manuscripts in the institutional repository, which we call the IR at UF, although many do rely on it for the deposit of other content. And obviously, it would be very expensive and very time-consuming for library staff to track down all of those manuscripts, and responding to our demands for those manuscripts would definitely place additional burdens on the faculty. When I first saw this slide, the word compliance was, as it is now, in the center, but there was one less figure on the slide. And if you look at the small print on the bottom, you'll see this was a slide that Howard presented at SSP in 2014. As he indicated, at that time they were very focused on getting the publishers and the funding agencies working together. And I approached him at the end of his presentation and told him that the person that was missing from his slide, who has since been added, was someone representing the vice president of research. That's the person on my campus losing sleep about compliance. And I acknowledged that need to focus initially on the relationship between the publishers and the funding agencies, but pointed out that this was a three-legged stool, and that three of the people represented here, once the vice president of research was added, were from academia. And I suggested that they were ready, that UF and other academic institutions should participate in the development to ensure that it met our needs as well as those of the publishers. And as you can see, and as you heard from Howard, he listened to that and contacted me last year to tell me they were ready and asked if we were still interested. And I said yes, that I was. And so we proceeded to participate in the pilot. The common questions that I get asked about these two pilots are why Elsevier and why Chorus, and I think this slide really answers both questions. As I said, UF authors publish about 8,000 articles a year. 8 of the 10 publishers most selected by UF authors are Chorus members. Elsevier has the largest volume of any of them, with 1,100 to 1,300 articles per year in Elsevier journals, followed by Springer Nature and Wiley. Automated solutions for identification and access to articles by UF authors from multiple publishers reduces the burden on our academic faculty, on the library faculty and staff, and by sharing the data on compliance on the staff of the Office of Compliance under the Vice President of Research, but also on the faculty members themselves. We are a very large R1 institution with a very diverse portfolio. So this gives you a sense of kind of the range of disciplines in which we publish. So when I'm asked the question about why would Elsevier and Chorus choose to work with the University of Florida, of all the universities they could have worked with, I would say first, because I asked. It certainly helps to have a willing partner. But second, because we are comprehensive and research intensive. We're sixth in the U.S. in the production of PhDs, with 796 awarded last year, for example. So there's a lot of research happening on our campus. We're at about $770 million a year in research. The Elsevier project was the beginning of this, and it was to take data about articles by UF authors and put it in the institutional repository. So when you search the institutional repository, you would find published information from our authors, as well as conference papers and other types of things that they might deposit. This is a display of the screen from the Elsevier project, and as you can see, the articles will be identified as one where you have access and one where you need to check access. What's interesting to me about this one is the one with check access circled was published in 1990. It does have a UF author, but we don't have the back file to that particular journal. So the Elsevier API is identifying correctly for a user who's coming in from our IP range that they may not have access to the article, while a user from another institution that does own that back file would have seen you have access. So Elsevier has developed this set of free APIs that they make available, and they do present results that are specific to the status of the individual user. So it isn't that the article's in the UFIR, it's that the person trying to access the article, what their status is relative to having a license to access that content. We expect to include the information for articles by UF authors generated through Chorus. As David said, that was something we had found with the time sensitivity of getting the project running that we didn't go to doing that part of the implementation, but we still hope to do that to broaden the coverage of UF authored articles in our IR, but our primary focus was on looking at the compliance mandates for public access and how we could improve that. So there are already, as mentioned, 7 publishers working with us on this pilot project, and we're hoping that more will join. They're already in discussions with a number of other authors, and I think the success of this project will help to encourage others to join. At least we certainly hope so. So the institutional pilot, as we've operated it, is focusing on the identification of articles written by our staff, faculty, and students, the discovery of those articles, and then ultimately matching that information to compliance with agency deposit requirements. So this graphic shows the workflow for the pilot. Both UF and Chorus during the pilot were identifying the DOIs for our authored articles, and then we were sharing that information back with Chorus because we were sort of matching our sources and our techniques just to make sure that we were actually developing a system that would be as comprehensive as possible. This is not necessarily the way it will work in the long run, but it was something we wanted to do in the pilot. Chorus then is filtering those DOIs to include U.S. agency-funded research only. We agreed for the pilot that we wouldn't look comprehensively at all of the publications by our authors or all funding sources, but that we would focus on those U.S. agency-funded ones. And then Chorus is monitoring the DOIs for public accessibility. Reuse license URLs are recorded at Crossref. Preservation is provided at Clocks and Portico. And then they're reporting to us the ingestion status by matching with the agency portals to confirm that. So Chorus is creating and updating a UF dashboard and alerting US about the accessible content on a monthly basis. And then the libraries are sharing that data with the Office of Compliance at the university and also with the faculty. There's another way of looking at the workflow. It's trying to demonstrate how Chorus is assisting universities in complying with funder public access management. The information we receive from Chorus is being shared obviously with the Office of Compliance to be compared with data in their grants management system to identify articles that result from federally funded research and to confirm deposit in the appropriate repository. That reduces the number of articles that the office has to monitor and the number of UF authors they have to contact to follow up and ensure compliance. At UF, we're placing the initial responsibility for compliance with the article deposit on the PI, as some of the funding agencies do. So this information is also useful to the PIs and to their department chairs and deans who are in turn monitoring their compliance. But ultimately, the responsibility for the university as a whole falls back on the Office of Compliance. And we do think as more and more publishers participate, the volume of articles identified and reported will very much increase the value of the service. You've seen a couple of views of dashboards. So this is the UF dashboard, very similar to what Michael showed to you. And then for the lower part of our dashboard, again, showing the pie charts and then the list of agencies for whom information is already available in the system through the pilot project. And as he said, all of these items are interactive and all of them can be drilled down. So I could click on NSF and I could then see very quickly what are the NSF articles that are in the system, and I could click on information from any one of those articles and assuming the appropriate rights to access, click through actually to the article. So we find that there's a great deal of information being provided, and the dashboard itself is a very interactive tool. But an important part of it is that we can download files from this, either a CSV or a tab delimited file, and that information can then be reprocessed to be matched with our grants management and other systems on the campus, so that it's not just a matter of accessing the data through the dashboard, but actually reusing the data to combine it with other resources on campus. So we've just completed an analysis of the pilot. As Howard said, we're just wrapping up this first phase of it. And here are a couple of things that will show up in the report as it's issued. I think Denver and UF both feel that the project does facilitate institutional compliance and can reduce manual processes, but that more time is needed to implement changes and certainly to integrate the information from the dashboard into the internal compliance workflow and information systems. We're still very early in implementation at the university. So the whole process is a fairly long one. The award has to be granted after the start date of the compliance mandate. The research has to be completed, the results have to be published before the compliance mandate actually occurs. So although we're encouraging our authors to go ahead and deposit in these agency repositories, in many cases it's not yet an article that's subject to the mandate because the grant itself is too new. But this project is helping us then to anticipate and plan for full compliance as the grants are completed and the publication increases dramatically, which we know will happen. So future reports might include having the universities matching our ORCID IDs and our grant IDs and submitting them back through Chorus to enhance the metadata backup channel in the system, which we think would be of benefit to everybody. And there is additional time needed to explore how this information is going to complement internal reporting, but it is already causing us to have discussions with our Office of Research and for them to be looking at what they're doing and anticipating doing as we move forward. We have identified through the pilot some enhancements that we would like to see as it goes forward. And certainly some of these are already beginning to happen because we've been discussing them during the pilot, but to pick up the link to the location in the agency as well as the DOI on the publisher site, to link to data sets as those begin to be published with them. We want to provide selected articles based on ORCID and grant numbers. For us, it has been extremely difficult to identify articles that are uniquely University of Florida. Unlike Clemson, Cornell, Emory that have relatively unique names, there's a whole lot of institutions that have the words University in Florida in their title. And with our multiplicity of authors, the way that they identify the university or the department is pretty varied. And so that's really been one of our major challenges, is being sure we find all the UF articles and that we get out all the ones that are not really ours. So the degree that we can, as publishers, require more use of ORCID and more use of other university identifiers, it will help us, I think. And obviously we do want to expand it so it covers more funding sources. And one of the things our Office of Research has said is that our authors are not always as consistent as they should be in identifying their funding source. You heard a little of that earlier. And so we do want to see even ones that don't identify a funding source, because we may be able to match that author up with a grant and realize that he or she should have attributed it to a funding source. And as I mentioned, we really do want to expand this to include more publishers. And we do want still to implement moving that information also into our IR and linking it up to other information about material published by our authors. So I think one of the lessons learned was we did this on a very rapid timetable, and for good and sufficient reason, to try to do this as quickly as possible. We've had pretty much weekly meetings, and things have moved very rapidly, and both sides of the teams, I think, have been extremely responsive to one another in terms of improvements in the system on an ongoing basis. But 6 months was not a very long time for doing something this complicated. And so some of the goals, like moving some of this data into the IR, have been kind of put off to another phase. But I think that as we get more participants, the project itself will improve, both from the point of view of covering more content, but also from the point of view of more eyes on it. So that it's interesting that we have a moderate-sized private university and a large public university, so it helps with some diversity. But obviously, as more universities begin to get involved, we may hear different needs and requirements. And so we're looking forward to seeing it expand both from the publisher side and from the participating university side. And I think that's it for me. So I'll turn it back over to Alex.